Morning, assalamu alaikum. It's Jummah Mubarak as well. This being a Friday in Ramadan, and as we get into the last 10 days, so incredibly fast 20 today. People now it's all about the last 10 days, and it certainly is all about itikaf as well. And of course, we'll cover both of those things. So a warm welcome to all of you. Assalamu alaikum. Looking forward to engaging with you and you listening in on the show for the next 2 hours. And we have lots to talk about. We're going to talk about governance, particularly for Muslim and other faith-based NPOs, non-profit organizations. And we'll chat to Fayruz Mohamed about it. She's the chairperson of SANZAF, the South African National Chairperson Fund. So looking forward to that. And being the last 10 days that we get to itikaf, we're going to talk to Maulana Abdurrahman Layli about the how to get your itikaf right. We'll also talk about those who don't perform the itikaf. How do you get the last 10 days of Ramadan right? Lots to talk about there. There's been an apology and an extension of an apology from Mufti Menk. So we'll play that video clip as well. We'll also feature the Nur al-Islam Mosque in our feature of historical South African mosques. That comes up later. What have I missed out on? There's been a protest from with students around raising Palestinian issues, and that comes up as well much later on. So everything for you to connect with us, you can do that. You can comment on the back end of any of the Salam Media social media platforms, or you can WhatsApp, text or voice note 061 766 0355 061 766 0355. By the way, anybody saw, we spoke about Imran Khan on the Twitter space, which had a live audience of about 150,000-60,000 people, but that grew to 1 million people. There was the Jalsa, or the coming together of people yesterday, and I understand massive crowds out on the streets of Pakistan, whether it be Karachi, I think it was, as opposed to Lahore. If you know much about it, you have a thought on that, what that really means, do numbers really matter, and what that means for his future, then you can certainly comment as well. So yeah, lots indeed to talk about. The show itself is brought to you by Africa Muslims Agency. Imagine a world where every family has food for suhoor and iftar in Ramadan. I could put a question mark to that, isn't it? The question is, what do you do about it? So call the Africa Muslims Agency, call AMA on 010 0722 262.
Suhoor or iftar. This Ramadan, join African Muslims Agency to provide meals to the fasting for 100 Rand a day, a food hamper for 1,500 Rand, or feed a village for 15,000 Rand per day. Imagine if you could earn Allah's forgiveness in these 10 days through your acts of charity. Donate today. Call AMA on 011-834-8685 or donate online. African Muslims Agency, commemorating 35 years of empowering, educating, inspiring. World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic Sharia and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
Zakah has the power to end extreme poverty. If the whole world gave zakah, it could end extreme poverty many times over. Islamic Relief has been distributing zakah for over 38 years. Our zakah policy complies with strict Sharia guidelines. It's endorsed by qualified scholars, and it only goes to eligible rights holders. So, harness the power of your zakah with Islamic Relief.
Are you looking for a cross-border road transport company that is committed in achieving high safety standards, who is fast and efficient, and also excellent customer service? Garda Global specializes in cross-border transport from South Africa to Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. Garda Global, situated at 10 Daniel Road, Benrose, Johannesburg. For inquiries, contact our trained staff on 011 614 3108 or email info@gardaglobal.co.za. Safe, long haul into Africa is our business. Gardi Global Transport.
It's been a household name for years. It's been an important ingredient in South African kitchens, and it's been an affordable, healthy choice for your family. Helios, first our pure sunflower cooking oil, and now introducing Helios margarines and spreads. Following the same traditions and tastes you've grown to love and trust from Helios. Fortified with vitamins A, D, and E, also rich in omega-3 and 6 essential fatty acids for a healthy eating lifestyle. Helios margarine and spreads, available now at all leading South African supermarkets. Helios margarine, the tradition lives on.
The global wheat market is in turmoil and prices have risen rapidly. This places the most vulnerable Syrians at greater risk of hunger and food insecurity. Sponsor a ton of flour at just 7,500 Rand and help ensure displaced Syrian families get their daily bread. Donate flour for Syria online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more.
This is the Ashraf Garda Show, 8 to 10 a.m., and you're listening to Salam India.
Tell you what, we've had so many people requesting to say, you have NPOs, you have then Muslim NPOs, and therefore the need for governance of those NPOs are critically important. And why don't you do something about that? So we thought, yeah, let's do that as part of our big picture feature that we do every day. Let's get the big picture into governance of NPOs with a specific reference point to governance of NPOs in the Muslim spaces. Okay, so we thought let's talk about it. So my guest today is Fayruz Mohamed. She's the chairperson of SANZAF, the South African National Zakah Fund, and we thought that puts her into an eminently qualified position to comment about the governance of NPOs. Fayruz, appreciate your time and Salaam Alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ashraf, shukran for having me on your show this morning.
Thank you. Now, I said one is you're the national chairperson. You're also you're a CA, is that correct? And practicing as an auditor.
Yes, I'm a chartered accountant, although I'm not in the typical profession in that I kind of stopped auditing a while ago. What I do more is sit on boards, so I'm more in an advisory capacity.
Okay, and many boards. And then it goes, I cannot omit this, the organization called, is it Women I? Does I sort of stand for Islam with a small I? Yeah. Okay. Who are they? And then I'll tell you why, tell the audience why it's important. Who's Women I?
So they're an organization in the UK. So they basically acknowledge, recognize, and celebrate women all over the world, especially in around Islamic business and finance in that industry, because as we both know, that's a very male-dominated industry. And there are very few women, a lot of pioneers within that industry. And they thought, they need to recognize the women that play a part in the development and the success of Islamic finance. And we know how huge that industry is. So well done to them.
Okay, and in doing that, they then highlight 300 women, the most influential women in the Muslim world in that business and finance space, right? And as a result of that, they acknowledge someone like yourself. Where did you get placed in this list?
Sixth, alhamdulillah.
Well, I think that's outstanding, and I'll just stay with this because, as you know, as someone who drives the Champion South Africa project, a movement, we certainly look for champions in their spaces, and I mean it's an incredible acknowledgement to yourself, to your organization, etc., but also to South Africa that you can be placed number 6 from around the world. So well done to you. I also want to say, because I think it'll be remiss of me not to do that, Yasmina Frankie, who's your CEO, I mean, she was also placed pretty high up. Where was she placed?
Yes, alhamdulillah, she was ranked 17. So top 20.
Yeah. I mean, so that's incredible because, we've made the point that you got SANZAF in South Africa and the two key people, the chairperson and the CEO are both women and they are globally recognized. I mean, that's the classic example of, champion people building champion people. So, a thumbs up to both of you, right? So long may that continue. Now that puts you into an eminently qualified position to talk about what we're going to talk about next, right? When we talk about, governance of NPOs. I mean, you have a specific thought on governance in Islam. Share that with us.
Yes, Ashraf, if I look at governance within Islam, without hesitation, I would have to mention, the Khalifa Umar radiallahu anhu, how he intensified and structured accountability. If you look at it, he introduced a recording of inflow and outflow of funds within the Baitul Mal. And many Muslim organizations, I think they believe that when you hear the word corporate governance, it doesn't apply to them. And that's why at SANZAF, we don't use the word corporate governance. We prefer actually using the terminology good governance, because as soon as you hear that, there's a kind of inherent kind of feeling or connotation that it may apply to everybody. Whereas the corporate aspect, many people think that, the corporate, they're within the non-profit sector, so it's not relevant or not applicable to them. And obviously not understanding, that the quality of leadership is significant of good governance, irrespective of, which kind of organization you're involved in.
I guess that's a very important point. So I sort of remember that now, good governance over corporate governance, right? So with that in mind, I mean, you mentioned, Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, fine, but beyond that, I mean, to what degree does the Islamic ethos and the structure of the Islamic faith then influence governance in Muslim spaces, and actually by extension, the way all organizations should be governed?
I think they shouldn't be seen as a kind of distinct between good governance and from an Islamic ethos, because generally we believe that as Muslims, we need to behave in a certain manner. We need to be ethical by default, the fact that we are Muslims. And if you look at, even the Prophet ﷺ, where he used to speak about, accountability, we all need to be accountable, for the contracts that we're involved in. And that's kind of an essence of, as an organization or as a leader within an organization, what is your accountability towards that organization? And that's why I always feel that you don't get organizational ethics, you get ethics. And from a Muslim perspective, it's sad to know that we need to kind of highlight and remind individuals that, as a Muslim, you need to have inherent behavior. And that behavior needs to kind of filter through into the organization. And when you have the ethos of, being Allah conscious, always doing everything with ikhlas and ihsan, if those characteristics filter into the organization that you're involved in, I think we'll have less of these issues that we currently have, as you can see, within governance. And the two most challenges I find within governance issues is around accountability, and it's around that conflict of interest where you want to get involved in an organization, but for self-gain. And I think that is where the issues tend to start. And, we have huge challenges within many nonprofits currently, and we need to kind of resolve that.
So perhaps talk to us about that. I mean, so let's start with that all-important one, the conflict of interest. So, I mean, I certainly know what that means, but explain that for people who don't quite get, who don't understand it, and how that then plays out when it's not addressed, and how it should be addressed, of course.
Thank you, Ashraf. So when we talk about conflict of interest, it's basically where you need to be independent from decision-making of an organization, where you yourself have an interest in a particular, let's say, a particular transaction. And I think that's where many of these lack of governance or good governance, filter through, when people start having or belonging to an organization with an intention of gaining from that organization. So they never have the organization's best interest at heart. It's always their interests overriding that of the organization. And that's a huge challenge. And I think we need to start by ensuring that the leadership that we have, there isn't a conflict of interest. And if there is a conflict of interest, they need to then obviously make sure that they clearly present that they have a conflict of interest. And if there's any decision-making relating to that transaction, they need to obviously be recused from it. But we find that many of the board members are not diverse. You have your father or your uncle or your brother or, those kind of members. And then clearly that's where the issues result. And that's another issue around good governance, is that succession planning. You have so many people wanting to stay in these positions of power, because I suppose they feel that, they've either done well, or they feel, they're gaining from the organization, and they don't want to leave. And they don't allow the younger generation, young new blood to come on board, give a fresh set of eyes, new ideas, be a little bit more creative. Because when you have the same eyes on the same issue, you're never going to see a different result, because you're always looking at it with the same, set of eyes. So those are currently, the issues around conflict of interest. And, it's going to be an issue that's going to continue unless we have independent executive members, for example, or other people that, are not linked to the organization for any self-gain.
Now I'm thinking of a typical NPO. You can get SANZAF well established with a huge base of an executive level, then at volunteer level, and that's formidable. But you can also, typically you could actually get a person who started just a feeding scheme for Ramadan only, and it's Mrs. I'm saying deliberately, it's Mrs. X with her husband and her children, and she's inspired them. And technically, that's an NPO. Now my point is, they're there ad hoc for Ramadan, and then they close shop technically at the end of Ramadan, right? Do they also need to apply that level of governance when the reality is they are, as a family, doing everything, including the fundraising, probably even putting in their own money almost exclusively, if not then maybe even up to 80% or so?
Ashraf, as an established organization, and you have people that are a part of the community, you need those kind of individuals. They understand the community, they know the needs of them, and they are most closest linked to the individuals that, that may need support. And you have in organizations like SANZAF that actually need to support those kind of organizations, because if we come into any community, we actually need to then either deal with the leadership of that community. And that's why we always link to a masjid, because the imam is the one that obviously understands the community. He knows, the concerns, the issues that, and the needs of that community. And then obviously you'll have the extended individuals that's very purpose driven, that want to see the community obviously succeed, and want to obviously support those that are in need. And that's why they are important, because as an organization, we cannot be everywhere. And that's why we need those individuals so that we can support them. And like you say, yes, they are the marketing people, the fundraisers, the everything. But they also need to be supported by organizations like SANZAF. But what we then do is we make sure that whoever we deal with has to ensure that they also have some accountability. For example, if we're giving them a pot of food, these are the amount of people that a pot of food can actually feed. Are they feeding that amount of people? What are they actually doing with the distribution? Where are they distributing it? Because they need to be accountable for, even if they're collecting funds as well. And that is, I think, the mindset of anybody that wants to start a nonprofit. The accountability is important, because you're collecting public funds or public distribution, and need to ensure that you actually, deliver on the mandate that you've been given. And that's very important.
And your thoughts, therefore, and this is specifically a Muslim question. I don't know how many NPOs there are that are Muslim inspired in South Africa, but what's your gut feeling as someone who understands auditing? How many are practicing good governance annually?
Well, I can tell you more or less in terms of the nonprofits that are registered within South Africa, there's close to about 260,000 nonprofits registered. And in fact, the government is actually going to, put some very close eyes on these nonprofits and actually deregister them, because a lot of them are not compliant. If you look at in terms of Muslim nonprofits, there's been an estimate that around about 10% of those are non-profit Muslim organizations. And I find that one of the challenges amongst, and even established non-profits, is the timeliness of their financial statements, the audited financial statements, in that, not presenting the accountability. Like I said, it always comes back to accountability and transparency. Them not disclosing and sharing the information and the mandate that they've received and the decisions that they've made to the public. Because at the end of the day, the public has every right to know exactly how they've distributed the funds that they've collected. And I think that's why it's important that, the implementation of good governance is, a positive, and enhances the success and the sustainability of any nonprofit. And if they realize and see that, and I think they'll obviously be much more successful, I suppose, inshallah. Allah gives rizq, and whatever we receive as an organization, it's what Allah has decreed. But we make the effort. We kind of, share what we've distributed. We share the plans, that we have ahead. And I think the public just wants to know, I've given you, for example, 10,000 rands. How have you distributed that? And that's a kind of general kind of question that anybody can ask, and they should be mandated and responsible to disclose some information. We're not saying they need to disclose everything, but at least of the decisions that they've made. How much money have they spent towards administrative costs? How much money has gone to a bursary project, for example, or any project that they've decided to deliver on.
Okay. And I mean, do you find in your experience, and of course you can speak from a SANZAF point of view, but others as well, that yes, they need to reveal the distribution, right, on an annual basis via financial statements. But on the flip side, do you get the public asking you? So, for example, does Ashraf Garda, because I haven't, does Ashraf Garda come to SANZAF, an organization that I respect and admire greatly? Do I come back and really study on an annual basis where the money's and income versus expense, where the monies have been distributed, or in fact, it doesn't really happen?
No, it does actually happen. And I think it happens because we generally release our financial statements as well as our annual report within 3 and 4 months after year end, respectively. And, and we actually publish it in Al Qalam, in Muslim View, so the public can actually see it, in the comfort of their own home. And that's where they have time to scrutinize this information. And many times we have people questioning, saying, okay, you've had this distribution. Why is the distribution perhaps only 98% as opposed to you need to distribute 100%? And those are valid questions. So we obviously, when we look at the questions, we realize that, people are actually looking at the stats. They're looking at the results, which means they're interested. They want to know and understand the organization. And many times it's just about, they may not understand the results that have been produced, because it's very much, if you look at the set of financials, you need to have some financial mind to be able to understand it. But then that's why we also release the annual report. And annual report gives you, much more of non-financial information. It's about the projects. It's about our human resources. It's about development. It's about our future plans, etc. And that gives people just a better understanding of the organization, where we're heading, our challenges, and what we're doing with the funds on the various projects.
Well, I'll tell you what, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, I said, is there a, we spoke to Yasmina Frankie the other day about the how-to around zakah, very, very topical, because people tend to distribute their zakah in Ramadan. But is there a how-to of good governance for Muslim NPOs? Is there an ongoing workshop that takes place, even independent of their own organizations?
Ashraf, that's a very good question. And if I look at it, there's abundance of knowledge and experience out there, even causes, for example, and guidelines. But I think, like you say, it is the transition, from the old guard to something new. And SANZAF even recognizes, there are challenges, out there, but we offer training programs, currently through our Imam Town program, which I'm one of the champions of. And this is where, for example, and it's not just for masajid committees and imams, it's actually for any nonprofit. We invite any nonprofit organization, because that's what the masjid actually is. It's obviously it's there for the community. So we run monthly governance workshops for masajid committees and imams, sharing knowledge on basically how they can be more effective and efficient as a committee serving the community. And then we also have SANZAF has been involved with Amal and OCAF and UXA. We've established a non-profit NPO guide for Islamic non-profits that has been developed, and they can view that on our website too. But I think besides that, SANZAF has always been available to any non-profit. If they are struggling and they needed some guidance, if they wanted some templates, why reinvent the wheel? Governance isn't a one-size-fits-all. You've got to be practical in that. Here's perhaps a control that I can implement, but is it practical to my organization? How do I need to ensure that I still, mitigate the risk, but then I can just make sure that, it's practical? Because if you look at many nonprofits, the resources are limited. They may just have 3 people compared to SANZAF having 122 people. And you need to make it very practical to the organization. Otherwise, it won't be sustainable. You're going to
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I certainly would take a greater interest in the how-to around governance of NPOs, particularly in the Muslim spaces, and beyond that, moving forward, right? Which gets me thinking, your broader thought about, we talk about why do nations fail? That's another whole conversation in its own right. But if I reduce it to organizations, why do organizations succeed and why do organizations fail? And perhaps your thoughts in the context of governance.
That's a very good question. And I think when we look at why do organizations fail, I think it's basically around, if I can sum it up to 3 things, it's where they basically miss the things that they shouldn't have done. And if you look at, those kind of things, it's, if you look at technology, where they should have, for example, be very agile and use technology basically as an enabler. And then if you look at, for example, the things the mistakes they've made, maybe they've acquired an asset or something like that, which they shouldn't have. And then you obviously get the malice individual that, intentionally or deliberately, had an interest where they self-gained, or where the organization obviously got disadvantaged or had to end up, had to pay liability. But, at the end of the day, those are all kind of ways of, and it all stems back to leadership. It's all about the quality of leadership that you have within the organization. People that are, that has diverse experience, people that wouldn't be able to, miss those things that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And like I said, the mistakes they did, what they weren't supposed to do as well. And if you look at those things, you need people to identify, where are the risks within the organization? Where are we not looking at that could eventually, be detrimental to the sustainability of the organization? And, for those members that are involved in the organization that is there for self-gain, you need to actually find some ways of ensuring that you either filter them out. You need to ensure that there are consequence management within organizations. And that's, I think, is really lacking. If you look at public sector, nonprofits, people believe they do what they do because they think they can get away with it. And because of that mindset, I think there will continue to be malice towards the organizations.
Yeah, and there's lack of questions being asked across organizations. We spoke about NPOs, but definitely with regard to government, which is another issue completely. And there's been almost an acceptance, a tacit acceptance, like, that's the way it is, and I get that that's wrong. What then are your thoughts? When I'm just looking at something very topical with the KZN floods. And again, government coming up with some relief aid. And it's amazing how there's this public outcry to say, please don't let government administer it. Many people naming names and saying, give it to gift to the givers. But whoever it is, the principle is like anybody but government. And that speaks to a lack of trust, a lack of credibility in the people who administer. Now, if I reduce that to the Muslim spaces, without going into names, I don't expect you to. But what's your perception then about the credibility and the trust issues around Muslim NPOs with the public, that is, of course?
I think I must say, alhamdulillah, if you look at the overall public perception of Muslim organizations, I think there is a huge element of trust. Although we always say, trust is good, but verifying or checking is better. And sometimes people always say, with good governance, you need to ensure that, there needs to be an element of trust. Absolutely, because you need to ensure that you can't put so many controls in place. You're never going to get done at the end of the day. But I think if you look, and it's unfortunate when you have certain organizations that, gets into the limelight or the public perception or idea, then, it kind of has it filters down to all organizations. So when you have an organization that's now currently, there are irregularities happening, there is, misuse of funds or self-interest gain issues or lack of proper record keeping, it kind of just dampens the entire mood and culture around the rest of the organizations. And, when those things happen, we at SANZAF, our eyebrows just lights up and say, what extra do we need to do? Because we have checks and balances in place. But when these things happen, and it can happen to any organization, collusion happens everywhere. You can put the best controls in place. And that's obviously to be able to identify fraud, to prevent fraud or corruption. But with collusion, things will happen because then you will have a break in a control. But I think when these things happen with these big organizations, it doesn't just lose credibility within that organization. I think it kind of filters down to the rest of the organizations as well. And that, for me, if we could have a regulator within the Islamic environment, that would ensure that if you want to be a credible or have a good standing in kind of stamp within the public environment, if you have this kind of emblem or standard that has a regulated body that can say, okay, SANZAF, if you have this emblem or this standard, then you are somewhat in good governance, which means people can trust because we've checked your work, we've checked your transactions, we're somewhat happy, you have audited financial statements, etc. And then people, I think, will just have some sort of comfort that there is an external body that makes sure that organizations are actually doing what they're supposed to be
Well,
doing.
I mean, I tell you what, I mean, as you're talking about it, I'm like saying, absolutely, that needs to happen. So I mean, two things. Why has it not happened? And as we wrap up now, I'm thinking audience is saying, absolutely, let's go ahead and have the regulator where people, it's voluntary, but there's massive credibility around that, right? So what would it take for Muslim-based organizations, people like yourself, to now drive that project in terms of this national regulator of Muslim-based NPOs?
That's a very good question. We always tend to have that question, even when the NPO guideline for Islamic nonprofits was launched. And it's something that's on the agenda. I don't have a solution for you. It's something that is needed. It's desperately needed. And some organizations have even approached SANZAF because, alhamdulillah, we've been for good governance, at least recognized for the work that we've done around good governance. We've received an award from the Global Good Governance from Cambridge IFA in the UK for transparency and capacity building, alhamdulillah. But I think from a resource perspective, we don't have that resource, and we won't be able to manage that. But I think a few organizations that are in good standing, because it's no use you establish a regulator with an organization that they themselves are not compliant with good governance. So you need to ensure that whoever does become a regulator or part of a body of a regulator, that they themselves are in good governance standing, and that's not always possible. It's a bit difficult.
Well, I tell you what, it's a good thing you've suggested it as we get into the last 10 days of Ramadan, because it's that type of good thoughts around good governance that we need to adhere to, and that, I think, in essence, is a sunnah as well. So you've put it on the agenda. You've said lots of things, but on the agenda right now is, what about establishing a regulator around good governance that we can tick off in the Muslim-based NPOs? Let's see who picks up or those puzzles. Fayruz Mohamed, appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Shukran, Ashraf, and all the best for the rest of Ramadan.
Inshallah, to yourself and your organization, SANZAF too. Well, there you are. Lots to consider coming out of that. There's like a whole checklist around good governance, but the back end of that is like, why not have a regulator where Muslim-based organizations will sign up to, and if they've been passed off as one that practices good governance, they get this logo that says you've been accepted, which gives you even more credibility than you currently have. And don't you want that? So important. Your thoughts on that, you can comment on the back end of these interviews on all Salam Media social media platforms. We'll certainly pick it up, but also directly via WhatsApp, text or voice note 061 766 0355 061 766 0355. By the way, we're into the last 10 days of Ramadan, which means it's time for itikaf. So how do you get that right after this?